Welcome, everybody, to the Avive podcast. My name is JF Benoit. I'm your host. I'm the best-selling author of Addicted to the Monkey Mind. And Avive is based on my book, Avive, An Adventure in Belonging. And the core of Avive is about truly learning that fulfillment, like reaching happiness in our lives, actually comes from a true sense of belonging. And how we achieve this true sense of belonging is through first connecting with our own emotional body, being able to attune to our own experiences on a daily basis, and also attune to others. So the principle is that, in Avive, we get to understand that we have been conditioned to believe that belonging comes from achieving external success, come from approval of other people. And we don't realize, but unconsciously, we behave in this way. And underneath, what's happening is like the nervous system is like a radar who's seeking to belong. And so when we are not aware that we keep operating this way, we have small little successes, meaning that, yeah, you might get a raise at work, or you might get your partner to be excited about something with you. The key here is that underneath, right, those little rewards that we get along the way, our sense of love and value is sort of like always put in question. And the more we become aware of that, the more we can actually learn to reclaim our sense of belonging. So this is the adventure that we invite you to be on with us. I've invited Carrie to come back today. Thank you so much for being with us again, Carrie. And we're going to explore this Avive a little further today. And so I'm glad that you're here to help us facilitate the process.
I'm glad to be here too. I really enjoyed it last time.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be able to have a conversation about some of the deeper aspects of our lives that oftentimes are not talked about.
Yeah, I was thinking about last time, we touched on a lot of different things, but one of the things that it kind of struck me was how much we kind of judge ourselves, and we touched on that a little bit. And then I was thinking about, I have a lot of different friends who have this really harsh inner critic kind of for like everything that they do, and it kind of paralyzes them in so far as being able to kind of make decisions or go forward doing anything. So I had that question for you. What is that about? Like, where does that come from? How does that start?
Yeah, it's so ingrained in us that it's difficult to actually recognize it in the moment when we're triggered. Like, for example, let's say you have a project at work that you're really excited about, and then it doesn't go well, right? Or, there's some kind of, failure that happens, and that's usually when the inner critic starts to kick in. And the issue is that for most of us, we're in a mindset that we believe that correcting ourselves, and the reason why we correct ourselves is because that's the very treatment we received growing up, right? So we let's say you got into a tiffy at school with another student, you come home, and the emphasis is on the behavior. It's unacceptable. You did this, and this has to change, and this has to stop, and we're going to take you to the principal's office, and we're going to have a conversation. And so this correction way, right, of being, meaning that that's what we receive from our caregiver. They had good intention, but the truth is that what that is ignoring is what's happening at the nervous system level. So at the nervous system level, we already know that we've done something wrong, right? And we already know that somehow we have to change this behavior, but we're nervous. We're nervous because why? We're afraid to be rejected by our parents. We're afraid that the consequences of what's going to happen at school. And as long as that nervousness and that anxiety doesn't get addressed, it festers in us. So that's what happens to most of us in our childhood, and it happens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of times where we have those events. And so what we adopt as a way of sort of operating with our own self is eventually when we become adults, we become our own worst critic, meaning that the first thing that happens when we fail at something, we adopt this, we subscribe to this voice that says, see, you shouldn't have done this and you should have thought of that better. And so the inner critic is actually really a product of this conditional way in which we were raised. And it's really painful, really. It really is.
Yeah.
You know?
As you were talking, I was kind of having that feeling of also of just being so kind of overwhelmed by everything. And that inner critic is just that feeling of not being a kind of afraid also of not knowing the answer to what you think you should be doing. Kind of
Right.
like,
Yeah. So a lot of sort of like uncertainty rises up when we're aroused in that way, meaning the nervous system is in a state of anxiety.
yeah.
And most of us, even like part of the issue too, is that nobody has taught us how to attend and attune to that anxiety. So we end up sort of like being lost in the anxiety, but then still identifying with more of those thoughts, which create more anxiety, doesn't resolve the anxiety, and just keeps propelling, right? This like, and then I can't breathe, and then usually I go, we go into shutdown mode, or a lot of people sort of explode externally with their emotion, which neither of those are about attuning and attending to ourselves emotionally. They're more about reacting to that narrative, right?
Yeah.
That we're operating from.
Kind of in a fight or flight mode at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It can be
Yeah.
so challenging and excruciating, really.
Yeah. And so we have that inner critic because of certain expectations that we have of ourselves also. Like, is that
It's a combination of expectations that, in order for us to actually experience ourselves as okay, right, within our world and with the people around us, there's all these requirements that we behave a particular way. And it's unmanageable because we can't control it's like nobody's perfect. You're going to react, you're going to have a struggle from time to time. And so managing those behaviors are sort of like an impossible task in a way in terms of perfection. Like we can change behaviors and we want to change our behaviors. But the issue is that when the focus is constantly on the behavior, it's constantly on what we did wrong or what we could have done better or what we should have done instead. When the focus is constantly on that behavior, the nervous system, it gets more anxious and it doesn't resolve the issue there. And the more anxious we are, the more likely we are to repeat the same pattern, right? So
that's what I was wondering.
there's
Yeah.
an over-identification with the narrative. The belief is that if I judge myself, I will get to be different. I will change. If I focus on changing myself, fixing what I did wrong, then I'll eventually I will know better in the future,
So last time we were talking about how your brain, it develops these well-worn paths, like habitually doing things. So does your nervous system kind of do the same thing then? Like, are you just kind of more apt to have that be a pattern and go directly to that when that's kind of the way that your body's used to reacting to that?
The nervous system is like my favorite metaphor for understanding and when we say nervous system, I want to make it clear that we're talking about the emotional body, right? We're talking about, so in the nervous system exists like the root sort of is based in physical safety, right? So if you look at the basis, the foundation of the nervous system, that's the fight or flight you were mentioning. When there used to be a tiger in the bush, we had to fight or flight, in order to take care of ourselves, or freeze like an opossum, But all of those are survival mechanism. Now, what's interesting is that most cases, and especially when we're in the mode of being critical to ourselves, our lives is not in danger. But what's
Right.
happening at the emotional body is the radar is looking to see if we're okay, to see if we belong, to see if somebody else is going to judge us, to see if this failure means further failure in the future. And it's like a very survival thing, right? That exists. It's like, am I okay? Am I going to be okay? Does that mean I'm going to fail again in the future? Right? So that nervousness and that anxiety, unfortunately, when we keep being critical of ourselves, it never ever gets addressed. It keeps festering in the body. And as long as it keeps festering, what happens is we just fall back on more critical thinking, right? So we're using the mind as, it's like Einstein said it best. He said, you can't solve the problem from the same mindset that created it. And that's what we're trying to do when we are being overcritical of ourselves. We think the promise of that sort of judgment about ourselves is that we will shape up, which is the same conditioning we receive growing up, right? It's kind of like, change this behavior, shape up, change this behavior. Well, I'm nervous. No. It doesn't really matter that you're nervous. Just shape up, and it's just like, but I'm nervous. No, shape up, it's like,
Yeah. Our sense of community too, like our sense of safety is so much tied into our sense of community. So if we feel like we're doing something that's going to take us out of that community, then that would be further, that's safety. Historically we work together, and so having that nervousness about behaving appropriately or making the right decision, I guess, could be tied back to that also part of it, huh?
it's very crippling. Like, it's a form of judgment to actually think about making the right decision. So it means,
Yeah.
think of it, if you think, if you go further beneath that, the belief is that there's a right answer and I'm supposed to figure out what it is.
Right.
Versus, right?
Right.
Versus being me is trying things out, and then I'll figure it out as I'm allowing myself to be me, right?
Well, I had read something the other day. There was somebody who did some kind of a study, and they were measuring people's energy, and everybody talks about how, oh, love is the most important or powerful emotion. But what they found was that your body emitted more, um, kind of I don't know all the scientific background of it, but it was basically authenticity. So when people were being totally authentic, their body was totally giving all the right feedback, I guess, kind of thing. And I thought that was fascinating because that puts it into, love is kind of a general term, but then authenticity is really supporting, like what we were talking about last time, is just, it's okay that I'm feeling this, or this is just how I feel, because that is crippling about, I have done that many times about what's the right choice here. And then I can't make up my mind to do anything because I can't figure out what the right choice is. And then when people say, oh, well, you know what it is. And when you're in that state, you don't know. And that's why you're confused.
Exactly. Well, here's the beautiful thing about this, Carrie, is that you're absolutely right in what you're saying here, that authenticity is the very remedy that we need in that moment. So the
Yeah.
ultimate authenticity would be to simply say, I'm really scared right now to make the wrong decision,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
But
so,
that's too
but
simple.
it's that simple. But guess what happens when we actually say that to ourselves?
Yeah.
What's happening is the nervous system now feels seen. So
Hmm.
now what we've done is gone from the mental to the emotional, and the emotional goes, "Oh, you really see me right now." And then you go, "Yeah, I see that right now you're really scared to get the wrong answer. What is
Yeah.
that like?" And
Yeah.
that's attunement, right? And that's the beginning of changing the dynamic of this critical way of constantly obsessing about getting the right answer or keep
Yeah.
judging ourselves and being critical of ourselves.
Well, and that's such a hard question, the right answer. But then when you say, what are you actually feeling? That actually feels doable,
It
and like
does.
you were talking about it, my nervous system was just like, oh, yeah, that's great. That felt a lot better.
Well, and there's a difference too about amplifying. Sometimes I think people get confused between attuning to the emotion versus reacting from it and feeding the same sort of fear, right? So
Yeah.
when we are authentic, we're really saying, hi, I deeply care about your experience right now. So it's kind of almost like talking to a third person, right? Being able to descend in my emotional body and say, yeah, I'm really scared. Tell me a little bit more about that. Well, if I just say the wrong answer, Bill over here, might not want to hear from me anymore. Or, like it's still
Yeah.
like, but now it's not like from a place of victim. It's not from a place of feeding the narrative. It's like, okay, so in the face of these possible consequences, you're nervous. Okay, so I
Yeah.
get that, right? So it's allowing us to descend. And here's what's really the magical aspect of this is that, and I've tested this for over 20 years now, of finding that when we unhook from the mental part that keeps being afraid, right? That, oh my God, like, do I have the right answer? And we actually descend in the emotional body.
Yeah.
If we descend, at some point, there's a calmness that will settle in. And it doesn't come from solving the problem, changing the behavior, changing ourselves, none of that. What is actually happening is as we descend in the emotional body, at some point, the emotional body comes down and says, really, you're okay that I'm anxious right now?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, because I'm attending to you. I'm attuning to you. Oh, so we don't have to change anything right now.
Yeah.
No, no. And
Yeah.
so that experience, that visceral experience that we can actually attain, then relieves us from the fear of being accepted externally because we just did it with ourselves. Meaning we
Yeah.
accepted ourselves where we're at, that we are afraid that Bill might think bad things of us or think that we're not up to par or that we're not enough.
Yeah.
And we've accepted that in ourselves, that it's like, yeah, I do feel like I'm not enough right now. Oh, okay. And then it's magical because then it unfreezes us to move forward. And now we can go actually solve the problem. The issue is that very few of us are taught this skill, right, of truly attuning to our emotional body and being
Yeah.
there for ourselves. It
Yeah.
even
Because
sounds weird when I talk about it, doesn't it?
yeah. Well, I was just thinking, like, when you do that, you are just admitting, like what you said, admitting what is true for you. And then when you're trying to figure out what the right answer is to something, you're trying to be some kind of a fortune teller, like, okay, what is going to happen? And then if this happens, then this happens. And so it's so much more simple just to, okay, where am I at in this? That rather than trying to do the mental gymnastics of figuring out what's and ifs and all that kind of thing, you know?
Well, and it's also exhausting, right? Because the
It is.
possibilities are endless. And also, it might oftentimes be trying to figure out what is she thinking or where is he thinking or what are they thinking, And so it's trying to find safety. And the
Mhm.
way it's about, reaching for safety is impossible, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with judgment, meaning that when I judge myself, if I think I did something wrong, what's the intention behind it?
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
intention is I want to be a better person,
Mhm.
right? And so the beauty of that is that we are already this caring, loving person just from the
Yeah.
intention,
Yeah.
right? Isn't it a loving thing to want to be a better person?
Yeah.
Isn't it
Yeah.
like a deeply caring part of ourselves? And then
Yeah.
what's ironic is
Yeah.
that the way we go about achieving this sense of being okay, right, is by criticizing ourselves. But when we criticize ourselves, we do not notice the intention behind the criticism. Just
Yeah.
like what's the intention behind when I question myself or question my decision? Well, the intention is to get the right answer. Isn't that a good thing? Well, yeah, it's a good thing, right? So
Yeah.
who is this person in the present moment that's reaching to be a better person?
Yeah.
Who's that person?
Mhm.
Is it,
It's
is
who
it,
you are.
it's
Yeah.
who you are.
Yeah.
And so it's the recognition when we attune to the nervous system, it's the recognition that we already are a really deeply loving, really deeply determined person, deeply caring person in the moment. And we're not really fully owning that we are that person because we over identify with the thoughts that we did something wrong.
Mhm.
So the intention, right, of changing that and the person that I am for wanting to change that sort of doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yet it's there. That's what's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's like you're standing like the part of you that just is and that you can just attune to is sitting there all calm in the middle of the storm, and then your mind is like a tornado running circles around it, and they're like, "Hey, hey, I'm okay in here." And then meanwhile, you're like having this tornado of thoughts circling you.
Well, it's unfortunately, it's, I've been practicing and showing people. I'll tell them when I work with groups and individuals, and we do this on the podcast, where I'll
Yeah.
say to them, I'll listen to you talk, and then I will point out what your narrative is saying, and then
Yeah.
I'll immediately connect you with your emotional body. What is
Yeah.
this narrative? What's the experience that's unfolding? And what's fascinating is the way we live in our society is we immediately, even if we touch the emotional for like a short little amount of time, we'll bounce right back to more of the narrative. We're over identify. We even believe that the highest form of intelligence, lies within that thinking. The issue is that thinking is conditioned to sort of correct and reprimand ourselves. And so it doesn't resolve the issue of what's happening in my body when I'm nervous, because all it does is create more of the same, right? So
Yeah.
it's very,
More.
it's amazing how that's the biggest challenge that I see is finding the safety within oneself to actually feel okay to have the emotion I'm having,
Mhm.
right?
And so how is it that you kind of do that just by checking in like you were just talking about?
Well, first, I would say it does require a certain level of courage because the message we receive growing up is those emotions are not that important. What's more important is that I change my behavior, or if I did something wrong, that I change that or I fix that.
Mhm.
And it's so radically different. And I mean, often I think people with children can really relate to this. Like, the difference between, let's say, a kid who's throwing a tantrum and the mother or the father is just really frustrated with the kid. And does the tantrum go away? Does it change? It just escalate, and it's just escalate. And the more the adult wants the behavior to change,
Mhm.
the more it escalates. It doesn't change the behavior. Nothing changed. But if you watch, which unfortunately is not as common as we would like to see, but if the parent does the complete opposite, and it's simply validating the experience, right? It's like, whoa, I see a lot of anger right now. There's a lot of energy running in your body. And then the kid goes, yeah, yeah, right? And it's just like, and then you just say, yeah, I see you. I see this energy. I see. And then if you just stay there, there's no other thing to do, nowhere else to go, but just acknowledge, bring presence to the emotion. Don't judge it as good or bad. Just acknowledge that it's big energy and it's like it seems to be really present. And without fail, you'll see the kid suddenly feel so seen that he'll turn around and go, okay. And he'll just Go back to
We'll
playing or
play.
doing whatever they were doing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
And so,
That's
because we didn't receive this growing up, we don't quite know how to provide this safety to ourselves, right? Because we do exactly the same behavior to ourselves that was done to us when we were raised, meaning like, stop that behavior. This is annoying, stop screaming. The other people are going to hear you, or,
yeah.
like all
Yeah.
of just, and imagine, I mean, how many times are we told that? And so, of course, like, the little computer up here, just start to compute and putting the dots in a row and going like, okay, change your behavior, change your behavior, change your
Yeah.
behavior. It's
There's a
like,
correct way to do it. There's a
there's a
correct way to
correct
do
way
it,
to be,
and there's
and
a
it's
correct way
not,
not to
it's,
be.
and it's not you. And when you have emotions, that's not really acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's funny. I feel like that anxiety and that inner critic is so much of a it's like you said, it's very exhausting because it's so much in your head about worrying about different things, whether or not you're gonna like the right decision. So that's really kind of freeing to just kind of disconnect from that and hit
The
more.
right. The worrying is, you know, if we really follow anxiety, right? So, meaning instead of following the narrative, we follow the anxiety. As I was mentioning earlier, there's a goal, there's an intention, but there's also a goal, right? Underneath that narrative. So think of it. If a person is in an airplane and they're totally anxious, right? There's a little bit of turbulence on the airplane, right?
Yeah.
What's the goal of the anxiety?
Mhm.
Can you guess? Like, you're on an airplane and now you're panicking. So imagine that the
Yeah.
anxiety is so
Trying to stay
intelligent that,
safe.
what's that?
You're worried about staying safe, but I don't know that
Right.
anxiety can do anything about it.
Okay, so now you just illustrated the two dynamics that are at play. The first
Yeah.
one is that the anxiety is there because it doesn't want the plane to crash. That's
Yeah.
really what it is. I'm afraid the plane's going to crash, right?
Yeah.
That's the overwhelming thought. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And
Yeah.
it's the desire though through this anxious thought is protecting
Yeah.
ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So if it's no different than if we have our partner who's irritated with us. What's the fear?
That the love won't be there, that they're not gonna love us anymore.
Right. So we're no longer lovable. So then we start running anxiety. It's like, am I lovable? Am I not lovable? What's going on here? I want to be
Yeah.
lovable. So
Yeah.
all of these initial narrative are all about protection. They're all about safety. They're all about wanting to regain control. Wanting to regain control of my safety, of my sense of value, my sense of love, which is a wonderful intention, right? So we know, though, just talking about it even right now, we know that the result of the anxiety does not produce more safety,
Yeah.
right? So if I keep up, oh my God, the plane's going to crash. Oh my God, the plane's going to crash. Do I get safety? No, I don't feel more safe. I feel more anxious. Oh,
Yeah.
I hate that my partner is like irritated with me right now. This is not good. This is bad. Same thing. Anxiety, 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 right?
Yeah.
So here's the disconnect. The disconnect exists between the mind and the body. Usually there's a nice feedback loop between the mind and the body. But because we're over-identified with the mind, we stay there and the body gets ignored. And so it keeps amplifying the anxiety, but the anxiety is being ignored because we're attached to the thinking. So
Yeah.
once we learn, right, to actually let go of that thinking long enough to do exactly what we've been talking about, which is the attuning to this anxiety and saying, oh, I see you. You're really scared right now. Yeah, the plane might crash. Whoa, that's a lot to take in. Breathe, like, oh, yeah, I'm with you. And it's like, I won't abandon you. You know, I'm right here. I get that you're anxious. I get that. So notice that we could do the same thing that a parent would be doing with a child that would be right in front of you. We
Yeah.
send this message of, it's a message of acceptance of the experience itself. No longer the focusing on the goal or whatever, but it's just acceptance of that experience and building more and more and more acceptance to, yeah, I'm right here with you. We got this. Do we really got this? Yes, this is terrifying. Yes, I'm with you. I'm right here. Let's keep breathing through this. And then what naturally happens is that then once we have this sort of level of settling into acceptance, what starts happening is that now we have a different perception of the thought that says, oh my God, the plane's going to crash, or, you know, this is really scary. My partner is irritated with me. And what's settling in right underneath that is the very awareness that this thought does not bring relief. And it's an experience in the body. Do you see what I mean? If you jump right back to that thought, after you've created a certain amount of acceptance in yourself, you're going to see that it doesn't bring you acceptance. It doesn't bring you relief. It does the opposite.
Yeah.
So the key here is that this dynamic that I'm describing is what actually leaves us eventually to completely abandon following the narrative and the panicky mode and the critical self and all of that. It doesn't happen analytically. It happens from developing this attuning to the emotional body. Then from there, we experience so much relief that now we have something to compare it to. Right? We compare it to like, oh, when I go back to this thought, it doesn't produce the result I'm looking for.
Yeah. I was just thinking how, okay, so depending upon how you were raised and what was going on, for my particular instance, how I was raised, I kind of had to use my brain to figure out how much in trouble I was going to be in order to like alter circumstances to fit into this. And so it just struck me as you were talking about how we kind of can end up doing to ourselves maybe what our parents had done up to us up to that point. So you're using your brain, you're trying to, but then you get out of that situation and you really don't need that in the same way because you were trying to protect yourself from whatever results that you were going to have by this parent that was, you know, and so you were trying to figure that out. But then when you're no longer in that situation, it's almost like you're doing to yourself what the outer force would be doing. And it's not needed
Right.
anymore.
Do you
And
have
so
an
it's like,
example, Carrie?
um, I don't know. It was just very constant where I never knew for sure, um, what I would get in trouble for and what, I mean, you kind of know a little bit about my background and I could never really predict it, but I would try, like I would try to predict what my dad's, what he would do based upon different, you know, me behaving in a certain way, but I could never really get it, you know, correct. I never could figure it out because I think a lot of what he was doing was trying to throw me off a balance. So it depended where I was coming from. And it wasn't like a certain set of rules. It was more him wanting me to be off balance in a way. And so I was in my head a lot trying to figure it out, but I was not really successful. And so I just have found being out of that situation and then you're still trying to figure out the right thing to do, but then you get to a point like what we were talking about, you realize you can't figure it out like that. Like you really just have to adm- admit, and I'm still not the best of it. That's something that I'm still working on is just like what you say, okay, what am I actually feeling right now? You know, but
Right.
I didn't really think about it that way until you were talking about that, how I was doing that to myself for a while after getting out of that circumstances because I was so used to that, at that kind of state of anxiety, I guess, in a way of trying
Yeah.
to guess that outcome, you
Well, it
know?
makes so much sense that it's very common for a lot of us. We try to anticipate, right, how these, caregiver that are around us, especially if we know that there's some kind of backlash from what we're trying to anticipate, right? There's something that the parent's going to do, and then I know where it's leading, so I'm trying to prepare myself for whatever possibility of what might happen by anticipating that I need to know what he's thinking or what my mom's thinking or whatever. And so that dynamic is a coping mechanism. It's maladaptive. In Avive La Vie, we call them false belonging habits. They're very, very specific habits that we actually develop over time as a protective mechanism, right? So it does translate. What's most important, though, is to know that today, right? Today, when Carrie is in that place of questioning, right? And she gets into that mode, right? Mm-hmm. So her dad's not here anymore, right? He's not in the room. And yet she thinks that that's the way to protect herself. And so what we've identified is that the result is more anxiety. Yeah. And in order to connect the result, which is, you can say it analytically. I mean, in 20 years and running the rehab center we ran for 12 years and working with so many different, levels of distress and level of trauma. One of the things that was consistent is that people could tell us analytically, I understand this pattern. I understand that I do this behavior. I start questioning myself and I'm stuck in that. Yet, as long as you only know it analytically, it will never move past it. Because the real issue exists within the nervous system, meaning that because you've done this behavior of anticipating what your dad will do next thousands of times growing up, your mind and your focus of attention is over-identified with that. But imagine
over-identified with the brain part of it instead of the emotional part of it.
Right. So imagine if instead an adult, a healthy adult, would have stopped you in your track when you were growing up and say, oh, Carrie, I see that you're like trying to anticipate what your dad will do. How are you doing? Are you okay?
Yeah.
You can tell, right? I can see a smile on your face when I said that. Right? It's like, even as I say it, I can feel the nervous system going, oh, you see me?
Yeah.
Like, really? I do matter here? It's just like, well, of course. Doesn't she matter? This, this young, little girl that grew up with a dad always sort of thinking, it's like, wouldn't that have been a relief to have someone say, wow, like, what are you doing? Like, you're questioning, you're trying to anticipate, and what's that like? Like, and it's never, the beauty of this is that even though we didn't receive this emotional attunement, it is something that we can give to ourselves today. I can't emphasize this enough. We are not our behaviors. So no matter how many times even we have a tendency to revert back to those false belonging habits, like if you revert back to questioning yourself, the tendency when you start being conscious of yourself and you want to change this habit, the tendency will say, oh, you did it again. And I'll start being critical because you just did it again. That only perpetuates more of the same, right? It perpetuates more anxiety. It's very different to approach our behavior and unhooking from identifying as if that defines who I am, right? Yeah. So meaning like really, truly, it's like, it's the opposite. It's like, wow, Carrie did the best she knew growing up. How beautiful, right? That she questioned everything. She questioned herself and she's trying to figure out anticipating what's next. So here she is, like with not very much help. She figured that out on her own to have and develop this protective mechanism. How beautiful that she did that, right? So when she's doing that today, right, let's come back to the intention behind this, which is she is so loving, she's so caring, that what she's really doing, right, is trying to find a sense of calm and peace and okayness within herself.
Yeah.
Now, when she attunes to herself, she can recognize that questioning herself does not make her feel more authentic, more connected to herself. It makes her feel more panicky, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so it's very relieving. I think the process is a lot simpler than we make it, and it's much more about self-acceptance and
Mhm.
self-love. And
Mhm.
in order to have that self-acceptance and self-love, we have to unhook from the narrative and the identity that we are our behavior. We will
Yeah.
never be our behavior, right? It's just, we can be stuck in the behavior forever and we're still, right? That behavior doesn't define us. It just defines a pattern of false belonging. That's all that it does, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. That was fun because I didn't know when we started the conversation. I didn't know what it was going to be about. Also, it was fun to be thinking these different things during it and going, "Oh, I see that."
Well, learning about oneself should be a process that brings more ease and
Yeah.
more, like it should set us free, really, not make things more, stressful. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Carrie. This was
Yeah.
really helpful. I hope that everybody is gaining some awareness about attuning to their emotional body. If you want to
Yeah.
find more about Avive La Vie and what we offer here, we have a newsletter that you can be part of. We have online groups and we have weekend adventures that we offer. So all the links are in the description below. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Carrie, thank you so much for being with me again today.
You're
And we'll do
welcome.
it again soon.